And the first has to do, is very close to home for me. So, the kids come and they're like, wow, my friends, they all have a much better life than I do. And I'm looking at them and I say, you guys, wow, how spoiled can you be? I mean, you should have seen me when I was growing up in Zimbabwe and Sri Lanka. I used to walk uphill going to school, uphill coming back from school. And I'm like, yeah, you've heard all this. So but I thought about it. I said, wait, why do you think that your friends have a much better life than you do? They said, well, look on, whatever they're using these days, Instagram and Facebook. It used to be, and so on and so on. Look at all these pictures and all this, fancy stuff and all this, vacations and stuff, all this fun stuff they're doing. And I look at this and I scroll, and I say, wow, they do seem to have a good life. Okay. What's the problem? Think about it. What's the problem? I'll give you 2 seconds. And if you said, well, it's sampling bias, well, you're just, you know that we're in the sampling bias section. But if you really figured it out, think about it this way. What they're seeing on the social media is their friend's highlight reel. No, you don't post your entire life on social media. You post your highlight reel. Okay, now you post your highlight reel. Sure, the percentage, the fraction of good stuff in your highlight reel is going to be close to 100%. So now you infer from that bin, the highlight reel bin, that their life is comparable. Okay, you are taking one bin's sample, the fraction of good stuff in the highlight reel, and trying to make a statement about another bin, sampling bias. So I'm looking at my kids and saying, how am I going to tell this to them? Am I going to say, son, you cannot sample from one bin and then make a prediction about another bin? They'll look at me like I'm crazy. So figure it out. How am I going to help my kids through this sort of major trauma in their lives? That, the friends are having a much better life than they are, because you can get depressed otherwise. Think about it. I'll give you a couple of seconds. 1, 2, 3. So here's what I had to do. And it went against every grain of rationality that I had in my mind. But I had to do it. I had to tell them to post more on social media, so that then they could compare their bin, their highlight reel bin, to their friend's highlight reel bin. What they were doing was comparing their friend's highlight reel bin to their, regular bin, their everyday bin. Wrong, bad, sampling bias. Be very careful. It can crop up in very subtle ways. Okay, and it's cropped up in the professional, literature. Okay. So you can search. There's an article, Taller, Fatter, Older: How Humans Have Changed in 100 Years. Okay. So there's a study that studied, British recruits 100 years ago, around 1914 and 2014. So it's about a 4-year-old paper, and it concluded, that we're growing taller, fatter, and older. Okay. Now, what's going on here? What's going on here is they studied British Army recruits. And then you might think, well, did they just study the British population today in general? No, they studied the British Army today. Okay. But that is a filtering process. So that is a sampling bias. You're sampling bias in 1914, and you're sampling bias in 2014. And we have no idea in general how these biases will affect what's going on. So now you can try to think about, what exactly could be going on, because it looks like we're comparing apples to apples, but we're not. And if you're interested, you can see, I wrote it up on my blog, which has since, stopped being updated. But I have analyzed this specific issue. Okay, the one I want to get to is a much more contentious issue, which is, a few years ago, in a flagship journal, there was an article published which said the GRE test is a test that fails. Okay, and so what was the study based on? The study was based on the fact that if you take incoming students into let's say, a technically oriented field like math, physics, engineering, computer science, and so on, you look at these students, and then you look at their math GRE. So look at the math GRE of these students, and then some metric of success, like did they or did they not graduate with a PhD? Okay. And you find that there's no correlation between the incoming math GRE of these students and whether or not they graduated with a PhD. Okay, so pause the video and try to pin down what's wrong with this kind of a study. Okay, I'll give you a few seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, if you're coming back and you said sampling bias, well, by now you figured it out. There's sampling bias in all these examples, but okay, what specifically? Okay, so let's think about this a little bit. Well, what's the sampling? What's the filtering process? What's the sampling bias that's going on? And let's try to figure out how it's resulting in this, conclusion. Okay, so what's the filtering process? There are students who have been admitted to a PhD program. And it's like the monkeys who climbed up, the tree. It's like the animals that managed to climb up the tree. These students, so there's the sampling bias. These are all students who have been who have been accepted into the PhD program. Okay, but you might think, well, yeah, okay, but fine. So they're all students who have been accepted, and then we study whether or not the math GRE is predictive of whether or not you'll get a PhD. So you say, well, what's wrong with that? Can't I do that analysis? Well, you can, but think about the admissions process. Surprise, surprise, the admissions officers and the professors, whoever they are, when they're admitting students, they don't admit students who they think are going to fail, who they think are not going to make a PhD. So you look at a student and you see, okay, this guy has fantastic GREs and blah, 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 and you admit them. Okay, and then there's another student, okay, the GRE is slightly worse, okay, maybe a little bit worse, maybe even a lot worse, the GRE is much worse. But now you're deciding whether to admit. You will look for compensating factors. Oh, does this person work hard? Has this person done something else? Has this person maybe published a paper previously? Okay, and so you look at this and you say, oh, all kinds of other good stuff has happened. So you admit the student because you think they will succeed. Okay, and if us admissions officers were perfect at our job, then we would only admit people who basically succeed. And when you look at whether the GRE math is now correlated with whether or not you succeed, everyone succeeds. And that's because we take that into account in the admissions process. So, there might be a variance in the incoming GRE, but that is not on its own indicative of whether or not you will succeed, because there are compensating factors that are taken into account. Now, pause the video for a few seconds and think, what is the correct experiment to run in, for example, all these cases, but in the last case in particular? Okay, what's the correct experiment? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If you're coming back just for the ride, well, here's the correct experiment. Here's what you actually have to do. Take a bunch of, let's say, 22-year-olds. Okay, administer the GRE math on them. Good. Okay. Now, no matter what score they get on the GRE math, and I mean random 22-year-olds, now no matter what score they get on the GRE, admit them to graduate school. And then give them all the same amount of mentoring. So you see how hard this experiment is to do in practice. Give them all the same amount of mentoring, and now see who gets a PhD and who does not get a PhD, and see whether it's correlated with the GRE math, especially in a field like math or physics or computer science. Okay, now, what I'm saying is, I'm not saying that maybe the GRE has its flaws and maybe it's not that correlated with the outcome. Okay, but, I'm not making a claim that it is the best test on earth. But what I am saying is that the experiment that was run is flawed, is fraught with sampling bias. You need to run a different experiment to make that conclusion. Now, what's going wrong? So you saw the experiment that has to be run. The experiment that has to be run is take random people, administer the GRE on all of them, and take them all into the PhD program, and then see who graduates. Give them all the same amount of mentoring. That experiment is never going to be done. That's the ideal data for the machine learning conclusion to be, trustworthy. Okay? And so whenever things involve humans in some way, shape, or form, we rarely do the ideal experiment that is dictated by the theory. We use what's called convenient data. Beware of convenient data. It's fraught with sampling bias. Now, let me give you one final take on sort of, sampling bias, and then I'll give you a puzzle, okay? And, and then we'll move on to data snooping, another buzzword. So, you've probably heard it said that extrapolation is always harder than interpolation. So interpolation is quote unquote easy, extrapolation is hard. Let me show you the sampling bias view of this. Or, i.e., if you learn from one bin, you better be tested on that bin, not on some other bin.